My name is Danielle Mercer, and I've never told this story publicly before. Not like this. It happened on August 14th, 2022, and no matter how many days pass, the images, the sounds, the feelings, they never fade. I worked as a systems technician at an aerospace test facility in southern Nevada, just outside a town called Shale Bend. I was part of a small on-site engineering crew contracted for a private project with Equinox Aerotech, a company trying to break into the big leagues with deep space propulsion experiments. It wasn't glamorous. I wasn't an astronaut or a scientist. I was one of the people behind the scenes, making sure the wiring didn't fail and the communication systems didn't glitch. That day was supposed to be routine, just a midday ignition simulation inside a sealed testing bay. We'd done it dozens of times, but something went horribly wrong. One moment I was inspecting a diagnostic panel, and the next, everything around me was engulfed in searing light. There was no warning, no siren, just a split-second hum so deep I could feel it in my chest. Then a force like a giant hand slamming into me from every direction. My body was lifted from the ground, thrown backward against a railing, and everything turned to black. Later, I would be told that a thermal feedback loop caused one of the prototype thrusters to overheat, rupturing a containment valve. The explosion was described as unrecoverable. They said I was dead for 17 minutes, flatlined. No pulse, no oxygen. The med team tried everything. They shocked me, broke 2 ribs doing compressions, and even began prepping to call time of death. But in those 17 minutes, something happened. I didn't just black out. I didn't just drift into nothingness. I left my body. It's hard to explain to someone who's never experienced it, but the moment the blast hit, I felt myself torn away from my physical shell. There was no pain, only a cold detachment, as if the weight of the world had been lifted. I could see my body beneath me, charred and broken, surrounded by chaos. I watched people scream. I watched a man I had coffee with that morning fall to his knees beside me, blood on his face, trying to revive me. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. And then, the world around me began to dissolve, like fog overtaking a landscape. I felt myself pulled, not flying or floating, but drawn by something deeper than gravity. There was no tunnel, no light at the end of anything. It was like being pulled backward through your own thoughts, through every memory you've ever had, until even your memories start to blur. And then I was somewhere else. Not a place in the sense we know it, but it felt more real than any room I've ever stood in. There was a vastness to it, endless and pure. Everything shimmered with a living light, a light that didn't just illuminate but understood. It's like the air itself had consciousness, and I was being observed, not judged, not welcomed, just seen in totality. I was laid bare. Everything I ever did or thought or tried to hide from myself was visible in that light. And then he came. I didn't have to ask who he was. I just knew. There are no human words for it. The moment his presence entered the space, every cell of my soul vibrated. He didn't walk. He didn't speak with a mouth. But I heard him clearly. His voice bypassed language. It was felt. He said my name, not just Danielle, but who I was, my full essence. He called me by a name only I knew deep inside, one I didn't even recognize at first. And I wept, not from fear, but from the sheer overwhelming love and holiness that radiated from him. And yet, there was sorrow in him. I could feel it, as if something pained him deeply, something urgent. He showed me things, not just visions but realities. I saw the earth as if from above, not spinning in space, but exposed. Its people busy, restless, and completely unaware of what was drawing near. He didn't name names, but he let me see a man, a figure whose face shifted in form. First it was my supervisor, then a stranger, then it settled on someone I recognized from television. It was Davis Kellen, the CEO of Equinox, the man whose ambition built the rockets we tested. But it wasn't just about him. It was what he represented. I saw towers rising into the sky, monuments to progress and science, while the foundations below them cracked and crumbled from neglect. The higher humanity climbed in knowledge, the more blind they became to their souls. Jesus said something then that I will never forget for the rest of my life, and he didn't say it with anger, but with a grief deeper than I've ever known. He said, "They reach for the heavens, but forget who placed the stars." And then I saw fire, not symbolic, but real. I saw cities fall, not because of punishment, but because the structures they built were never rooted in truth. He showed me Davis again, standing on a platform, being praised, being worshipped even, and behind him I saw a void opening, a darkness of pride, like a wound in the spiritual realm that festered and spread. And Jesus wept. He wept not because he hated this man, but because this man didn't know he was walking straight into destruction, taking millions with him. He turned to me, and with more urgency than anything I've ever felt, he said, "You must go back." I didn't want to. I begged to stay. But he looked at me with a love so fierce, it pierced me. He said, "They will listen to you, because you have touched both death and life. Tell them the truth. Warn him. Warn them all." And then I felt myself falling through light, through memory, through sound, and I woke up screaming. The first thing I remember after waking was the cold, hard pressure of something pressing into my chest, followed by screaming. Not mine, someone else's. Then a blinding light overhead and the stabbing pain of life rushing back into a body that felt more like a cage than a home. My lungs burned, my ribs throbbed, and I couldn't speak. I just cried. I didn't even know why. A nurse grabbed my hand and whispered something, but her voice was drowned in the chaos around me. Beeping monitors, rushed orders, panic. I wanted to scream that I had seen him, that I had been somewhere that made this world feel like a paper-thin copy of something more real. But I couldn't speak. My throat was raw. They later told me I had coded for 17 minutes, and no one had expected me to come back. One of the EMTs said he'd stopped compressions for a full 8 seconds before something. He didn't even know what made him try again. I stayed in the hospital for 12 days. During that time, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that light again, heard that voice. Jesus. The name felt heavier now. Sacred. Unbearably sacred. I kept remembering the sorrow in his expression. And the warning. The urgency. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to go from dying to living again while holding that kind of message in my chest like a time bomb. When I was finally discharged, I returned to a world that felt wrong. Everything was off, not visibly but spiritually. People laughed. They fought in parking lots. They scrolled through their phones like nothing had changed. But everything had. I started to write down everything I saw during those 17 minutes. The visions, the words, the images of Davis Kellen standing on that stage with that spiritual wound behind him. I tried to make sense of it. Was it a metaphor, prophecy, or had I actually been shown the future? I remembered what Jesus said about towers and stars and foundations. It haunted me. I watched interviews of Davis Kellen, and every time I saw it, the pride, the blind certainty that technology was salvation. He was speaking at global panels, talking about colonizing Mars, merging consciousness with machines, building the bridge between man and godhood, as he called it. And it shook me, because I knew that he didn't realize what he was tapping into. I don't say this lightly, but what I saw behind him in that vision, whatever that spiritual void was, it wasn't just darkness. It was intelligent. It watched him, hovered behind him, fed off the worship he received. This wasn't science fiction. This was spiritual reality. And the deeper I went into prayer, the more confirmations I got. I began dreaming again. Not just normal dreams, but vivid, terrifying ones. Fires, collapse, false prophets with silicon skin and glowing eyes. People begging for help, but no one able to reach them. And always, that voice in my soul, soft but unmistakable. Speak, Danielle. They will listen to you, even if only for a moment. I told my family. My sister believed me. My dad did not. He said I was traumatized and needed counseling. My mother cried but didn't say much. It hurt, but I understood. How could I expect them to believe me when I had trouble believing it myself? But then things started happening that I couldn't explain. Emails would show up in my inbox, blank, but with subject lines that echoed phrases I had heard in the light. They reach for the heavens. He stands on broken ground. Time is not what they think. I'd hear songs in the grocery store that seemed to speak directly to what I was going through. Strangers would stop me and say things like, "I don't know why, but I feel like I'm supposed to tell you. Jesus loves you," over and over, too many times to be coincidence. I began to feel like I was living in the overlap of two worlds, one physical and one invisible but more true. And through it all, I kept remembering how Jesus looked at me, how he ached for humanity. It wasn't anger, it was heartbreak, and every day that passed without speaking out felt like I was betraying him. I didn't set out to become a messenger, and if I'm honest, I didn't want to be one. The idea of standing up in front of people or even recording my voice for others to hear made me nauseous. I wasn't a preacher, I wasn't a prophet, I wasn't anyone important. I was just Danielle, the quiet one who fixed wires and hated public speaking. But every time I tried to move on with my life, that fire inside me refused to die. It was like a second heartbeat, steady, insistent, holy. I began to pray for clarity, and the more I prayed, the more I began to feel him again. Not with my eyes or ears, but deep in my spirit. Jesus never forced himself on me. He never shouted, but his presence would settle on me like warm air before a storm, and I would just know he was near. One night, about 6 weeks after I left the hospital, I had a dream that changed everything. In it, I was walking through the ruins of a city I couldn't recognize. Skyscrapers lay crumbled, and the air was thick with silence. Not the chaos you'd expect after destruction, but a haunting, spiritual quiet. In the dream, I saw Davis Kellen again. He stood at the edge of a massive crater, looking down, his face blank. And behind him, rising from the smoke, was that same wound in reality, that living void. Only now it had grown. It had arms. It had shape. It reached for him. I turned to run, but something stopped me. A hand gripped mine, firm but gentle. I turned, and it was Jesus. His eyes were so full of sadness, and he said, "He does not see what holds him." I woke up sobbing. I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore, so I recorded a voice memo. Not for the world, not yet, just for myself. I described everything I remembered. The explosion, the afterlife, the warning, the light, the sorrow, the command to return. And when I played it back, I didn't recognize my own voice. It was trembling, cracked, but so full of something else. Authority, maybe? Truth? It was like the Spirit had spoken through me. That night, I prayed again, but this time I didn't ask for signs. I just said, "Use me, even if I'm scared, even if I don't know how." And almost instantly, I felt peace. The next day, I started working on a letter. It was addressed to Davis himself. I knew it sounded insane. I knew I had no reason to believe he'd ever read it, much less take it seriously. But I wrote it anyway. I told him everything. I told him that I had died at one of his sites, and that in death, I had seen truths no machine could calculate. I told him that pride is a veil, and that even the greatest minds can be blind to spiritual danger. I didn't threaten. I didn't condemn. I just told him the truth as it had been told to me. I never received a reply, but that wasn't the point. As I sealed the envelope and dropped it into the mailbox, I felt a weight lift from my chest. It was like I had finally obeyed. And that's when things began to shift in ways I couldn't have predicted. Doors opened. Conversations I never expected started to happen. A local pastor invited me to speak. He'd heard my story through a friend of my sister. I almost said no, but when I stood behind that microphone and looked out at a room full of strangers, I felt something rise in me that wasn't fear. It was purpose. I shared my experience, word for word, without exaggeration, without drama. And when I finished, there wasn't applause. There was silence, a holy silence. Then people started coming forward, crying, asking questions. Some said they'd had dreams like mine. Others said they'd been feeling a pull, a spiritual discomfort, for months. I realized then that I wasn't alone. This wasn't just my message. It was our awakening. What followed after that night was nothing short of a spiritual avalanche. Word spread faster than I ever imagined. It started with a few emails, mostly from people who had been at the church service, telling me they'd never heard anything like what I'd shared. Then came messages from people I'd never met. A woman from Ohio wrote to say she had lost her son in a lab explosion a year ago, and that my story gave her hope he might have seen Jesus before he died. A man from Sweden emailed to say that after watching a clip someone had uploaded of me speaking, he felt an urge to quit his job at a biotech firm developing artificial intelligence because he'd been having dark dreams about machines and fire. Couldn't believe it. I wasn't trying to start a movement. I just didn't want to be disobedient to what I'd seen. But I realized now that what Jesus had shown me wasn't just a personal mission. It was a global one. He wasn't concerned with my comfort. He was concerned with souls. And the more I spoke, the more he guided me. Not with flashes of light or booming voices, but through people, through scripture, through that still small stirring in the depths of my spirit that would not go quiet. I was invited onto a podcast, then another. People wanted to know what it was like to die, what it was like to see him. I told them honestly, dying didn't feel like death. It felt like waking up. The part that hurt the most wasn't the explosion or the pain. It was realizing how many people walk through life asleep, never knowing what's waiting just beyond the veil. And I told them about the sorrow in his eyes. I said, "He's not angry at us. He's broken-hearted, because we're building our towers on sand." Every time I mentioned Davis Kellen's name, people would lean in. They knew who he was. They'd seen him on magazine covers, on TED Talks, announcing plans to build floating cities and Neuralink technologies. He had become a symbol of future progress. But all I could see when I looked at him was a man beloved by God and totally unaware of it. A man standing in front of a spiritual cliff with no idea what lay behind him. And it wasn't just about him anymore. He was just the face of something larger. I began to see the same spirit I'd seen behind him in other places, in institutions, in governments, in the obsessive chase for human perfection through technology. It was like we were all being seduced into building a new Tower of Babel, only this one was digital. I began fasting and praying, asking Jesus what he wanted from me next. And one night, while alone in my apartment with worship music playing, I felt a wave of heaviness press against my chest. Not painful, but weighty, like holiness itself had entered the room. I collapsed to my knees. I couldn't speak. I just wept. And then I heard a whisper, not in my ears, but in my spirit. A whisper that said, "Tell them I'm coming, but not the way they think." And I knew, with a certainty stronger than anything I'd ever known, that this warning wasn't just about one man or one moment. It was about a shift, a reckoning, A season where hearts would be tested not by war or famine, but by deception. Where the greatest threat wouldn't come with tanks or missiles, but with comfort and innovation and promises of eternal life apart from God. I saw it so clearly, humanity being offered the fruit again. You can be like God. Only this time, the serpent had circuits and code. And I realized, this is why Jesus wept. Not because we built rockets, but because we forgot who gave us the stars. The more I obeyed, the more I began to notice something I never expected: resistance. Not physical, not always obvious, but spiritual resistance that came in subtle, chilling ways. It started with a friend I had worked with at Equinox reaching out after hearing about my experience. His name was Marcus, and we'd once shared late shifts and inside jokes about how the test facility always felt haunted. He was the kind of guy who believed in science, not stories, but he had heard my testimony through someone else and wanted to hear it from the source, as he said. We met at a quiet coffee shop near the city, and I could tell from the moment I saw his face that something had changed in him. He looked thinner, like he hadn't been sleeping. He said he couldn't explain it, but ever since the accident, things in the lab hadn't felt right. He said the prototypes were malfunctioning in ways that defied logic. Systems that had passed inspection would suddenly glitch or power on by themselves. Even more disturbing, he told me people were starting to report strange dreams. Nightmares, the kind that felt real. In one, he said, a machine spoke to him in a voice that wasn't synthetic at all. It was too ancient, too human. He said it told him, "You can live forever. Just step inside." I felt a chill crawl down my arms when he said that, because in one of my own dreams, I had seen a room filled with glowing chairs, each one pulsing like a heartbeat, waiting for someone to sit. And Jesus was standing at the doorway, weeping. I told Marcus everything. I didn't hold back. I told him about what I saw behind Davis Kellen, about the void, about the way it watched. His hands trembled as he held his coffee, and I could see the fear in his eyes. "You think something's coming, don't you?" he asked. I nodded. "No," I said. "Something's already here." That night, Marcus called me and said he wanted out of the project, out of the company. He said he was going to put in his notice and leave town for a while. But 2 days later, he was found in his apartment. They said it was a brain aneurysm. Sudden, unexplained, no history. When I went to the memorial service, something inside me screamed that this wasn't just random. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen something, or maybe gotten too close to the truth. It was then I realized that warning people wouldn't just be uncomfortable. It might be dangerous, but what could I do? Pretend it hadn't happened? Pretend I hadn't stood in the presence of the one who made everything and felt his heartbreak over what we were becoming? Couldn't. I wouldn't. The enemy of our souls wasn't just hiding in shadows anymore. He was stepping into the light, wearing a lab coat, offering salvation through circuits and machines. And people were buying it. They were hungry for it. I began speaking more boldly, sharing the message on live streams, podcasts, at gatherings in churches and homes. Some people rolled their eyes. Others wept. A few got angry. But I noticed something every single time. The room changed when I spoke the name of Jesus. Not just casually, not like a slogan, but when I spoke it from the place I had seen him, from the place of reverence and raw memory, that room would shift. It was like the air took a breath. People leaned in, even the skeptics. I realized this wasn't about convincing anyone. It was about reminding them. Somewhere deep inside every soul is a memory of him. And when you speak his name with truth, it echoes in that hidden place, calls them home. And that's what I kept doing, calling people home even when it cost me. I lost friends. I was mocked. I had people tell me I was mentally unstable, that I needed therapy, that I was using religion to cope with trauma. But none of them were there. None of them saw his eyes. None of them felt the weight of his sorrow. I wasn't just coping, I was carrying something. A message, a warning, and I would keep sharing it until my last breath. I think what stunned me most, as the weeks turned into months, was how many people were already sensing something was wrong deep in their spirit, long before they ever heard my story. It was like the world itself had shifted under their feet, but they didn't have the words to explain it. People told me they'd been feeling an emptiness they couldn't fill, even with success or family or faith as they'd known it. Some said they'd been overwhelmed by a strange fear that came at night, a fear that didn't feel natural, like it didn't belong in their body but had found its way in somehow. One woman told me she stopped watching the news entirely because every time she heard words like innovation or integration or future of humanity, her skin would crawl. I knew that feeling. I felt it too. It was as if beneath all the shining progress, there was a darkness we weren't naming, a spiritual current pulling people somewhere they didn't realize they were going. One afternoon, I sat in a small group gathering, just 7 or 8 of us in someone's living room, and we began to pray. Nothing big, no special lights or music, just silence and voices crying out to God. As I closed my eyes, I felt it again, that weight, that pull toward something beyond the room, like heaven itself had leaned in. And suddenly, I saw a vision, not in my mind's eye, but behind my eyelids, so vivid it felt more like memory than imagination. I saw a giant city, sleek and silver, pulsing with lights and movement. Above it floated a structure, circular, radiant, humming with energy. People were lining up, staring up at it like it was a god. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw it in their eyes. Adoration. Then the structure began to split open like a flower, and at its center, I saw something that made my blood run cold. An eye. A single, watching eye, mechanical and yet alive. I heard Jesus' voice again, firm but mournful. They will offer themselves to it, thinking they are gaining freedom, but they are surrendering their souls. The vision vanished, and I was back in the room, trembling. I didn't say anything at first, but one of the women in the group looked at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Did you see it too?" I nodded, and we both wept. I knew then that this was bigger than me. I was just one voice in a growing chorus of people being stirred awake, not to fear, but to truth. The deception that was coming, and in many ways already here, wasn't going to look evil. It was going to look beautiful. It was going to look like hope, like progress, like unity. But underneath, it would be rooted in the oldest lie the serpent ever told. You will be like God. And the most dangerous part, people wouldn't be forced into it. They would choose it, willingly, eagerly. They would lay down their humanity for the promise of something greater, not realizing they were trading something eternal for something temporary and hollow. And this is why Jesus wept. Not because people sinned, he already paid for that, but because people would reject what he offered in exchange for something that looked shinier, faster, newer. I remembered what he said to me in that place between life and death. Tell them I'm coming, but not the way they think. That phrase played over and over in my heart like a prophecy that wouldn't let go. I didn't know all the meanings behind it, but I sensed this much: before he returns in glory, there would be a counterfeit, a savior in man-made skin, and many would follow it. And that's why this story matters. Not because I'm special, not because I died and came back, but because God is still speaking, because Jesus is still warning, because we are closer than we think. There was a moment around 3 months after the accident when I seriously considered disappearing from all of it. Not because I didn't believe anymore, but because the weight of carrying this truth was starting to crush me. Every time I turned on the TV, I saw pieces of what Jesus had shown me playing out in real time. There was an announcement from a major tech company about uploading consciousness, a government initiative to build digital identities tied to global health data. Interviews with Davis Kellen where he smiled, calm and composed, talking about unlocking the final frontier of human evolution. He spoke with confidence, with that polished charisma that made people lean in and believe. But I couldn't watch him without feeling sick. It wasn't just that I remembered the vision. I could feel the darkness behind him again, watching, growing, and yet the world clapped. They called him a genius, a savior of mankind. I tried to tell myself that maybe I had misunderstood something. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But then I would dream again. The dreams didn't stop. In one, I was back in the facility where the explosion happened. Except it wasn't burned anymore. It was rebuilt, gleaming, high-tech. But there were no people, just machines, humming and blinking with silent precision. And in the center of the room was a chair, the same kind from the other dreams. Only this time there was a man sitting in it. His face was obscured, like static on a screen, and around him were rows and rows of others, all seated, all plugged into something invisible. They didn't move, they didn't speak, they just sat there, their eyes open but hollow. I tried to scream in the dream, tried to shout for them to wake up, but no sound came out. That's when I saw Jesus again. He stood at the far end of the room, arms outstretched, tears streaming down his face. He didn't speak, but I heard his heart cry louder than any words. This is not what I made them for. I woke up gasping. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and I knew this wasn't about a company or a man. This was about humanity being led away from its creator, slowly, softly, through promises of transcendence that sounded noble but were rotten at the core. I turned off my phone for a week. I didn't go online. I avoided every invitation to speak. I needed to be alone with God, to ask if this burden was really mine to carry. And during that week, something incredible happened. I was sitting outside on my tiny apartment balcony, staring at the stars, whispering to Jesus that I didn't know how to go on, when I saw the sky shimmer. I don't mean that poetically. I mean it physically shimmered, like light bending through water. And then I felt him, not just emotionally, but physically, like someone was sitting next to me. I didn't see him, but I felt warmth on my left side, and peace flowed into my chest like a river. I wept. I wept like a child because I knew he hadn't left me to carry this alone. He was with me. He had always been with me. And in that moment, I didn't feel burdened. I felt chosen. Not above anyone else, not better than anyone else, but chosen to speak, to warn, to plead, not because people were evil, but because they were asleep. The same way I had been before everything exploded. The same way Davis was now. The same way the world was smiling at its own reflection while standing on the edge of a cliff. That night, I prayed one of the most dangerous prayers I've ever prayed. I said, Jesus, break my heart for what breaks yours. And he did. After that night, I never looked at the world the same again. It was like my eyes had been permanently altered, not physically, but spiritually. I would be walking through a mall or sitting in traffic or standing in line at the grocery store, and I could feel it, a divide running through everything. On the surface, people were smiling, scrolling, sipping their coffee, living life like nothing had changed. But beneath it, there was a quiet storm brewing in their souls. I began to see people differently, not in judgment, but with this deep, aching compassion that wasn't mine. It was him. It was how he saw them. The barista at the coffee shop who avoided eye contact. The man at the gas station yelling into his phone. The girl on the bus who kept her headphones in and her eyes closed. I saw them like flickering candles, still burning, but dimmed by years of pain and distraction and fear. And I would hear his whisper over and over, so gently it nearly broke me. They don't know how much I love them. It wasn't just about warning people anymore. It was about calling them back to that love. To remind them that before the world got loud and cold and fast, they were created in intimacy, in purpose, in beauty. But how could I do that in a world that now worshipped machines more than mystery? How do you talk about Jesus to a generation that believes it can make itself immortal? These weren't the same arguments people had 20 years ago. This wasn't just about atheism or doubt. This was something deeper, something spiritual, a replacement, and I saw it everywhere, in ads that promised limitless potential through technology, in influencers who spoke of uploading their memories into digital clouds, in the way kids looked up to tech giants the way past generations looked up to saints. We weren't just progressing, we were transferring our trust. And Jesus had shown me where that road ends. He had shown me the cost. That's why I couldn't stop speaking. Even when I was tired. Even when it felt like no one was listening. Even when my own friends began to pull away. One of my closest friends, Alana, called me one day and said, "Danielle, I love you, but you're scaring people. Why can't you just believe God is love and leave it at that?" And I told her with tears in my eyes, because love warns. Love doesn't let people walk off a cliff in silence. She didn't respond. We haven't spoken since. That night, I lay in bed and cried until I couldn't breathe. Not because I was angry with her, but because I knew she was only saying what many others were thinking. That I was too much, too intense, too serious. But I wasn't trying to be any of those things. I was just telling the truth. A truth I didn't ask for but had been given. And the weight of it grew heavier every day. The more I saw, the more I wept. Not for myself, but for them. For all of us. I began to feel a holy urgency rise in me, like a fire in my bones. I knew I was supposed to start sharing everything. Publicly. Not just in small rooms or private gatherings, but online where anyone could find it. Where Davis might find it. Where even the most unlikely soul might stumble across it at 3 a.m. while scrolling in a moment of desperation. And that's when I started recording. Not flashy. Not edited. Just me, my voice, and the weight of what I had seen. I told it all. The explosion. The out-of-body experience. The presence of Jesus, the sorrow in his eyes, the warning about Davis and what he represented, the counterfeit salvation, the spiritual wound growing behind human ambition. I uploaded the first video with shaking hands. I didn't expect much, maybe a few views, maybe a few comments, but within a week, it had over 100,000 views. Emails flooded in. Some mocking, some curious, some desperate. And in every message, I heard the same question, could this be real? And my answer was always the same, it is, and he is. The momentum that came after I posted that first video was something I never could have prepared for. It was like something had cracked open in the spiritual atmosphere, and people were suddenly hungry, starving for something real, not polished. Not religious tradition, but raw truth. I started receiving messages from people all over the world. A single mother in Brazil wrote that she had seen the same mechanical eye in a dream months before and had told no one out of fear of being called crazy. A former computer engineer from Tokyo told me he had been developing biometric tracking software for a global firm and had quit after a dream where Jesus showed him millions of people lined up to receive an upgrade that stole their voices. A pastor from Nigeria wrote to tell me that my testimony matched visions his intercessory prayer group had received during a month-long fast. These weren't coincidences. They were confirmations. People were seeing it, pieces of it, in every nation, every tongue, and now those pieces were fitting together like a puzzle that had been hidden in plain sight. And while that should have comforted me, what I felt instead was a deepening weight. because I realized we were running out of time. This wasn't just a spiritual message, it was a spiritual emergency. I began to have visions in prayer, unprovoked and terrifyingly vivid. One night, I saw a tower, not made of stone or brick, but of data. It reached higher than the clouds, flickering with numbers and names and symbols I didn't recognize. People were climbing it, their bodies glowing with digital patterns. They moved like they were sleepwalking, smiling peacefully. But at the top of the tower was a throne, and on that throne sat a figure I couldn't fully see. Its form shifted constantly, part human, part machine, part beast. I felt such overwhelming dread that I fell to my knees sobbing. I cried out to Jesus, and suddenly the vision shifted. I saw a remnant, small but bright, standing at the base of the tower, weeping and praying. And from their mouths came light, real light, that shot up into the sky like flares. And the tower began to crack. I knew then that the war wasn't over. It hadn't even started yet. And the remnant, those willing to speak truth even when it cost them everything, they were the key. Not governments, not institutions, just people, broken and humble, who had seen Jesus and could not stay silent. That was when I understood why he had sent me back. Not just to share what I'd seen, but to awaken the remnant, to help them remember who they are, to call them out of hiding. And I knew that if I stayed quiet, I would be disobeying the one who gave me life twice. So I pressed forward. I kept recording. I started writing. I fasted more, prayed deeper, and every time I wanted to give up, every time the attacks came, whether through people or anxiety or that dark whisper that said, "You're making this up," he would show up again, in small ways. A stranger sending a verse I had just prayed the night before. A random sermon online that echoed my dreams word for word. A moment of peace so sudden and strong that it left me breathless. He never left me, and because of that, I couldn't leave this mission. Not even when it scared me, not even when it hurt, because this isn't about me. It never was. It's about what's coming, and the choice we all have to make. Follow the counterfeit light that promises power, or fall into the arms of the one who died to give us real life. It was around the same time that I began to feel the spiritual battle in my physical body. I would wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, like I had been running in my sleep. There were nights I couldn't breathe, not from any medical issue, but from something pressing on me. A weight that didn't belong to this world. Sometimes it was fear. Sometimes it was grief so thick I couldn't move. And other times it was just silence, cold and wide and cruel, like the absence of something holy. I would lay there and whisper, "Jesus, I know you're near," again and again until the peace would return like a blanket settling over me. I didn't talk about that part much. People saw the videos, the testimonies, the interviews, but they didn't see the nights I lay on the floor crying into my pillow, begging for strength. They didn't see the spiritual warfare that came in whispers and strange coincidences. Emails that vanished from my inbox, calls from blocked numbers where no one spoke, comments on my videos that were quickly deleted but always said the same thing, "He's watching." I knew it wasn't just people who were listening. I knew the darkness I had seen behind Davis Kellen wasn't a symbol. It was real, intelligent, ancient, and it didn't want me to speak. But I also knew this. The darkness trembled at his name, Jesus. Just saying it out loud would shift the atmosphere around me. So I said it constantly. I would walk through my apartment whispering, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus," until the fear left. And it always did, because he wasn't just a vision or a dream, he was real, and he was with me. One day, I received a message that made my hands shake. It came from a private email with no subject line. Inside was a single sentence, "Stop talking about Davis." That was it. No name, No threat, just that. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I printed it out and put it in my Bible, right next to the page where Jesus says, "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me." I didn't know who had sent it. Maybe someone who worked for him. Maybe someone else entirely. But I knew this. It meant the message was getting through. It meant the truth was unsettling something. And that was confirmation. I began to double down. I stopped sugarcoating. I stopped worrying about being liked. I spoke the truth. That there is a spiritual system rising in this world that looks like advancement but smells like death. That we are not entering a golden age of humanity. We are approaching the great shaking. And Jesus is calling his people out of compromise, out of comfort, out of silence. I didn't speak those things to go viral. I didn't want fame. If anything, I wanted to disappear most days. But every time I opened my mouth, something holy moved through me. It wasn't eloquence. It wasn't brilliance. It was obedience. And God honors obedience. I began to meet others like me. People who had seen glimpses of heaven, of hell, of warnings and wake-up calls. We formed a small network, not official, not public, but we shared dreams, visions, and prayers. And we all saw the same thing. Time was short, not in a panic-inducing way, but in a clarifying, soul-piercing way. Like the sun was beginning to rise, and the shadows were scrambling to keep their grip. That's why I'm telling this story now. Not because I want your attention, but because I want your heart to wake up. Jesus is real. Heaven is real. And so is the war we are in, whether we see it or not. I died in that explosion, but what he showed me brought me back to life in a way I never knew was possible. And I won't stop speaking, not until the whole world knows. There's one part of my story I haven't shared until now, and it's the part that haunts me the most. It didn't happen in the hospital. It didn't happen in the months after the accident. It happened during the 17 minutes I was gone. Somewhere between the encounter with Jesus and the moment I returned to my body. I didn't talk about it because I didn't have the words. I still don't fully understand what I saw, but I feel a responsibility to tell it now. After Jesus spoke to me and showed me the sorrow in his eyes, he told me I had to return, and I began falling. I thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. As I fell, I passed through a place that felt different from the rest. Colder, heavier, darker. It wasn't hell, not in the fiery, tortured way people imagine, but it was something close. It was like a hallway between worlds, but the walls pulsed with sorrow, and the air itself felt like grief. I couldn't move of my own will. I was being pulled, slowly drifting through. And then I heard them, voices, not shouting, not screaming, but whispering. Endless whispering, like thousands of people all murmuring at once. It was unbearable. I covered my ears instinctively, but the sound wasn't in my ears. It was in my soul. I looked around and saw figures lining the edges of the hallway, but they weren't whole. They were like shadows of people, and each one was tethered to something. Some were connected to screens, some to books of glowing pages, some to small idols I didn't recognize. All of them were frozen, their eyes wide open, but they didn't blink. They didn't breathe. They just stared. It was like they had been promised something beautiful and were still waiting for it to arrive. But it never had. Jesus wasn't there. His light didn't reach into that place. And even though I knew I wasn't meant to stay there, I felt the terror of it. I felt what it would be like to be trapped in a place where you had chosen something else over him, where you had traded the eternal for the artificial, and only after it was too late did you realize the lie. I passed through, and as I did, I heard a single phrase that echoed louder than all the whispers. They gave up their image. I didn't understand it then, but over time, through prayer and study, I realized what it meant. We were created in the image of God. That is our identity, our design, our divine stamp. But there are forces, technological, spiritual, cultural, that are pushing us to exchange that image for something else. Something made by man. Something editable, erasable, reprogrammable. We are being told that the next evolution of humanity is to transcend biology, to integrate with machines, to become more than human. But Jesus didn't die for data. He died for souls, for flesh and blood, for spirit. And the enemy knows that if he can convince us to abandon that image, to surrender it willingly, then he doesn't even have to steal our souls, we'll hand them over. That hallway I passed through wasn't hell. It was a warning, a glimpse of what waits for those who follow the deception to its end. I think about those tethered figures every day. I think about the sorrow in their eyes. And I speak now so that maybe, just maybe, someone will choose differently before it's too late. I believe Jesus let me see that place not to terrify me, but to anchor me, so that every time I start to doubt, every time I feel foolish or alone, I remember that there are people still walking toward that hallway, unaware of where the path leads. And if my voice, my broken, trembling, imperfect voice, can shout loud enough to wake even one of them, then it's worth it. Every tear, every attack, every sleepless night, it's worth it, because he is worth it. I've come to realize that the greatest danger we face in this generation isn't war or famine or disease. It's the quiet deception that tells us we no longer need a savior, that we've grown beyond the need for God, that human ingenuity, if given enough time and power, can fix everything. That lie is more dangerous than any weapon, because it doesn't feel evil, it feels empowering. It speaks to our pride. It strokes our ambition. It promises control, comfort, and certainty in a world that has always felt unpredictable. I see it in schools where children are taught to trust machines over miracles. I see it in the entertainment industry, where artificial beings are portrayed as saviors and humanity as obsolete. I see it in boardrooms where decisions are made based on algorithms, not conscience. We are outsourcing our humanity piece by piece, and we don't even realize it. And the church, oh, how it grieves me. The church has been largely silent. So many pulpits preach about blessings and breakthroughs, but few are warning that we are standing on the edge of something prophetic. The book of Revelation doesn't just speak in symbols. It speaks in warnings, about systems that look like lambs but speak like dragons, about marks and images and beasts that rise not with violence, but with deception. I didn't understand these things when I was lying on that hospital bed, freshly returned from death, with tubes in my mouth and monitors all around me. But I understand them now, because Jesus didn't just save me, he commissioned me. Not in a way that comes with a title or a stage or a ministry, but in a way that comes with sleepless nights and trembling hands and holy fire in my bones. People often ask me, Danielle, are you afraid? Of retaliation, of being wrong, of losing everything. And I always answer the same. I was terrified. I wanted to run, but I can't, not after what I've seen, not after standing in the presence of the one who holds eternity in his gaze, not after hearing his voice say, "Tell them I'm coming." And I know now what he meant. He's not just coming in the clouds one day, he's coming for hearts now. He's calling, wooing, warning, and too many are ignoring him because his voice doesn't sound like a trending clip or a TED Talk. Still, it's small, it's holy, and if you're not still, you'll miss it. That's why I'm still speaking, because I believe there are people listening who don't even realize it yet. People who feel the tension rising but haven't found the words for it. People who lie awake at night wondering why they feel disconnected in a world more connected than ever. People who look at the future and feel more dread than hope but don't understand why. This message is for them. For you. Because the answer isn't a chip or a tower or a throne made of code. The answer is a cross. A blood-stained cross where love poured itself out in full and cried, "It is finished." That is where real freedom lives. That is where real life begins. And if I have to spend the rest of my days whispering that truth into a hurricane of lies, then so be it. Because when the storm ends, and it will, only one kingdom will still be standing. And his name will not be forgotten. His name is Jesus. Some nights, I still dream of the explosion. Not the flames or the chaos, but the exact moment my body gave out and my soul left the world. It's never violent in the dream. It's quiet, like a breath being taken, not released. And in that moment, I feel both terrified and peaceful, like standing at the edge of something so vast your mind can't hold it. But the dream always shifts. I don't go back to the same light or to Jesus standing in glory. Instead, I'm somewhere in between, a dim, gray stretch of silence, like the moment before a thunderclap. And I always see the same thing now. People standing in line, each of them holding something different. Some hold phones. Others wear virtual headsets. Some are holding the hands of children, guiding them forward. And at the front of that line, waiting with arms open, is not a man or a machine, but a figure made of light and shadow, always changing. His face is different every time. Sometimes it looks like Davis. Sometimes it looks like me. And I think that's the point. Is whoever they trust, whoever they believe will save them. That figure reaches out, not with violence, but with welcome. And as each person steps forward, they're marked. Not on the hand or forehead like the images we're used to, but somewhere deeper. Their eyes, their souls. I see a faint symbol flash through them, just for a moment. And then they stop being people. They become echoes, holograms of who they were. Still smiling, still walking, but hollow. And every time, I try to scream, to stop them, to shout, "This is not life. This is not light." But no sound comes, until suddenly, in the back of the line, I see someone look up. Just one. Sometimes it's a woman. Sometimes it's a boy. Once it was an old man with tears in his eyes. And they hear it. A whisper. The name of Jesus spoken like a memory they forgot they knew. They turn. They step out of the line. And as they do, the entire world shifts. Not with earthquakes or storms, but with light, so pure and fierce that it swallows the shadow whole. That's when I wake up, every time, and I lie there, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, not afraid, but alive. Because I know what the dream means. I know that there's still time, that even now people are turning. People are hearing the whisper of their maker, the one who wrote their name before time began, and they are remembering what the world tried to erase. That they are not accidents, that they are not machines, that they were created in love by love for love. And if I could give my life to help even one person remember that truth, I would. I already have. I died once, but he brought me back for a reason, to speak, to warn, to love without fear. And I won't stop, not until the line is empty, and the shadows are gone, and every soul finds its way back to the arms that have been open from the beginning. If you've listened to everything I've said and something inside you is stirring, don't ignore it. That stirring is not fear. It's not confusion. It's the Holy Spirit knocking at the door of your heart, reminding you that you were made for more than this world can offer. I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a celebrity. I'm just a woman who died and was sent back with a message that's been burning in me every single day since. I've seen Jesus. I've seen his eyes, felt his sorrow, heard his voice call out for a world that's sprinting toward the edge, thinking it's flying. I've seen what waits for those who trade their souls for empty promises. And I've seen what kind of love still reaches for them anyway. He's not done with you. He's not finished with your story. I don't care how far you've gone, what you've done, how numb you feel. If there's still breath in your lungs, he is calling. This message was never just for Davis Kellen or for Equinox Aerotech or for tech leaders or politicians or spiritual influencers. It's for you, right now, in whatever room you're sitting in with whatever doubts you're carrying. He sees you, he loves you, and he's not calling you to religion. He's calling you home. Everything you've been chasing, the clarity, the healing, the freedom from fear, it's not in the next app or device or breakthrough. It's in the nail-scarred hands of the one who already overcame death for you. The world is getting louder. The deception is getting stronger. The shadows are growing bolder. But so is the light, and you get to choose which side you're on. Not tomorrow. Not once everything makes sense. Now. So please don't wait. Talk to him. Right now. Say his name. Ask him to show you the truth. Ask him to come into your life. And then listen, because he will. I'm not special because he came to me. He'll come to you too. He already has. That's why you're here watching this, still listening. Because deep down, you've always known. And this moment is your invitation to come alive. Eternity is not a concept. It's real. It's waiting. And the arms of Jesus are wide open. Come home while there's still time. And if this message has stirred something in you, share it. Don't keep it to yourself. Let someone else hear. You never know who's standing in line right now, waiting for something to save them. Be the voice that helps them turn around. Because I'm telling you with everything in me, there is one name that saves, one name that heals, one name that is coming back, not with empty promises, but with glory and fire and love that never ends. And his name is Jesus. If this story moved you, if something in your spirit awakened, don't leave this video without responding. Share it with someone. Subscribe to hear more testimonies like this. But more than that, go spend time with God. Not religion, not rules, just you and him, because your soul is worth more than any technology, any ambition, any counterfeit kingdom. And eternity starts now.